Chapter 8, Part 2. So we're going to get into the Ba and the Ka. And we were looking at these two images. We just looked at the Tutankhamun's tomb sarcophagus, and now we're going to look at the fouling scene in Thebes, Egypt. Okay, so this is a fresco, and I'm going to read from the book about the Ba and the Ka because it's a little bit complicated, and I don't want to confuse you. So on page 222, in the first paragraph, it says, I quote, "According to Egyptian beliefs, a human soul possessed both a Ba and a Ka." And I'm going to interject here. There's actually 5 parts of the soul, or 5 types of soul in Egyptian belief, but we're just going to cover the 2 because it's kind of, a lot of detail to get into for Egyptian artwork, and we're covering many other things. Egyptology and Egyptian art is 3,000 years old. It covers a huge time period. It's the biggest chunk of time with a stable art style in the history of the world. So there's a lot of information. But let's get back to Ba and Ka. The Ba is the part of the soul whose seat was the heart or abdomen in the body. It is depicted as a human-headed bird. Okay, so we'll go back. You don't see it very well in these images. Okay, so when humans take their last breath, the Ba flies away from the body. 70 days later, after the body has been mummified and buried, the Ba returns hungry and thirsty. So for the Ba, right, in the end of that first paragraph, it gives you a list of what they need because it is hungry. It needs water, wine, grains, dates, cakes, and dehydrated beef and fowl. So all that stuff would be put into the tomb, right? Okay, so then we're going to get into the Ka. The Ka is the mental aspect of the human soul, the second paragraph, page 222. It is symbolized by 2 outstretched arms or by an attendant figure that represents the double of the personality. The Ka dwells in a lifelike statue of the deceased, which is placed in the tomb. It is important for both the statue and the sarcophagus to have a strong likeness of the dead person so that both the Ba and the Ka could easily recognize their destinations. The Ba and the Ka were thought to enter the tombs through a small chimney or an air vent. Provisions for the Ka would include chairs, beds, chariots, models of servants, kitchen utensils, dishes, and simulated food, unlike the real food the Ba required. So there's a bit more of a list there. You can go through it, but this is part of what your homework is going to ask about these 2 different parts of the soul and what do they correspond to. So the likeness is important so that these both can recognize the body, the place that they need to return to, and you want to think about the difference between the 2 slightly. It's a little bit complicated, but try to get into that on page 222 is the best place. Okay, so when we're looking at this piece, which we already looked at a little bit, we see the wings of Horus around this coffin. We're calling it a coffin, but really technically they would call it a sarcophagus. So these are the wings of Horus wrapping around him. Okay, so these are things that are typical of what you would see with Egyptian art, this list here. But what is unique to him are his facial features, and it is imagined, or we believe that it is a portrait. Okay, so we're going to get into our fouling scene in a little bit more of a formalist approach for a moment. Remember, formalism is the elements and principles, which you know so well at this point. But when we look at this piece, and this would have really been a good example, to be truthful, there's a lot of repetition of line here, repetition of these different papyrus stalks and these curvatures here. So these shapes are repeating, the lines are repeating, so it makes a pattern. We know that, right? And even you could argue these wings that repeat because there are multiple birds here. There's 3 birds, so there's 3 sets of wings in this piece right there. So that's creating a pattern as well. So remember, we want to talk about organic versus geometric. This makes somewhat of a geometric pattern down here at the bottom. The stalks are kind of geometric, but they're bending a little bit. They're not super straight. And then these are organic for sure, these curvatures here, right? So when we look at an Egyptian artwork, we see a lot of stylization. This is very stylized, right? It doesn't look realistic. That isn't their intent. And you remember that realism is not always the intent of the artist or the culture. There's different meanings with abstraction. There's different meanings with stylization. For the Egyptians, excuse me, the side of the face, the profile, was the best angle or the most desirable angle to look at a person's face, and that is why the head is sideways. The torso, best angle was forward, so they turned the torso forward. The best way to identify a foot is profile. So certain parts of the body are in profile and certain parts of the body are forward. Looks very uncomfortable, doesn't it? So these are stylistic concerns. Another one is that it is very flat. We don't see that much depth of field. Everything wants to be explained in this picture, then it's pushed out onto the side or it's up above the figures so that we can see all the detail. There's not a lot of overlapping because everything wants to be seen. Does that make sense? So like the head of this bird is slightly overlapping these papyrus stalks, but we can still see the stalks. These birds are not realistically in any kind of spatial concern. They're all in their full profile, or the wings are open so we can see all the details, right? Overlapping here is not so much about depth of space, a little bit, but it's more about showing multiples, okay? All the information is presented in a flat form and it's stretched out and flattened. The last thing I'm going to mention here is hierarchical scale. Scale is important here, where the largest, most important figure is center and he's larger. That's the main thing, is that he is larger and more detailed. And then this is perhaps a child here, and that is his wife, who would actually be the same size in real life, perhaps, or closer than what we're looking at. But he's more important, so he's bigger. So that's a use of hierarchical scale. Okay, so this is listing the different parts that are in profile and frontal, and the eyes are frontal. That's what the weirdest part of the style of the Egyptians is. The eyes are frontal, but the face is sideways. Okay, so this is Hatshepsut's mortuary temple, and you can see now we're into a real mountain. We're digging into it, and we're hoping, at least these pharaohs are hoping, that this is not going to be robbed in the way that other tombs were robbed. Okay, so this is a monument to the greatness of Hatshepsut, female pharaoh, and it had 200 statues of her, painted reliefs and so on. But after death, the portraits were defaced and records of her rule were obscured because she was a female ruler. That's a close-up looking at this side of the mountain. But you can see our pyramid is now replaced with an actual live rock example.